I was around 16 when this happened. I was lying in bed, reading something. Initially, the room felt normal. Then it started to feel really icy. It wasn't that the room became cold, but more about the sensation it gave me, if that makes sense. It felt really uncomfortable. Next, it would feel as if something or someone was staring at me. There wasn't anyone there, nor did I see anything. But just the feeling of being looked at with hatred was enough for me. Often, I got the feeling, leave the room. So I did, and then I just played a video game of some sort. The thing would leave the room after about an hour or so. This happened about 3 times. In the same home, a flat really, 3 other strange things happened. The first was a shadow person sneaking along the walls of my bedroom during the day. Second, we had a dog, a small one named DJ. Imagine something the size of a fox terrier, and you've got it. One day, I came to collect something from my room. It was during the day, and DJ followed me in. I heard a deep growling from under the bed. At first I thought it must have been the dog, but I knew that DJ wasn't capable of making such a deep noise. It sounded either like a really big dog or a man doing his best and somewhat scary growling impression. This only happened once, but the experience stuck with me. Another strange incident with the dog was when he was afraid to come to the living room. Next to my bedroom, there was a small room we used as a computer room. DJ was in there at the time, and I heard him whimpering and pacing, even growling lowly at something in the hallway. I called him, but he wouldn't budge. I had to go in and carry him out of the room. All these events happened in the same flat. I lived there for a few years with my mum after the divorce. Things happened, and I left to live with my dad. My mum moved out a few months later, but I think she was the one that carried this thing with her. At my dad's place, a few minor things happened, but nothing compared to the experiences with my mother. When I was 37, I attended my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The journey was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I saw someone on the side of the road flagging me down. In the North Woods, no one ever leaves someone stranded. It turned out to be one of the guys I had attended school with, whom I'll call Jim. Jim got in the car and we started talking. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a bit older. When we reached the town, I asked if he wanted to come to the VFW for a drink. He said, "No, just take me home." Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, so I turned in that direction, but he directed me to a part of town on the outskirts, near the fairgrounds and the cemetery. There was a mobile home park out there, and I assumed that's where he lived. When we reached the end of the turnoff, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again." And he walked off into the night. I went to the VFW, met some of my old classmates, and we started talking. Please understand, I have never done drugs, nor do I drink more than soda pop. I was stone cold sober, tired after a 13-hour flight that included a 3-hour layover, but sober. As we were discussing who was coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off by the fairgrounds. Everyone got really quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stopped and laid down the mic. My cousin turned as white as a new cotton t-shirt. "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral." I started to feel really dizzy. I went out to the car to take some deep breaths and decide whether or not I was sane. There on the seat was the local newspaper, printed 8 years previously, containing Jim's obituary. I still have that damn paper. Every now and then, I take it out, stare at it, and still wonder what exactly happened. This is a story I do not often tell. I sincerely promise that this has scarred me for life. And although I have sought psychological and natural explanations for what I heard and what occurred, they remain unsatisfactory. When I was a child, I was afraid of the dark. I would tell my mother I heard voices in it. They were not evil, but they were unfamiliar, and so they scared me. It was not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night and hear whispers, as I would call them, when asking my mum. She thought they were just bumps in the night and typical childhood nightmare material. I often tried to explain to her that it was more than that. The whispers sounded different from one another, the way people's voices do. On some nights, when I was so scared of these whispers, I would sleep in my mum's bed with her. It was an added bonus that the bathroom was directly outside her bedroom door, convenient for my late-night bathroom visits. I should add at this point that, when walking out into the hall to go to the bathroom, you would look directly down the stairs leading into my living room on the first floor, as my mum's bedroom was on the second floor. On one such night, around Christmas, I awoke and felt the need to relieve myself. I walked out the door and distinctly heard the phrase, "Look." To my astonishment, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the very bottom of the stairs. The light had no other source. It was by itself, and I was transfixed by it. Being a little kid, and with it being only a few days from Christmas, I knew what this light was. It was Santa. How else could he get into my house to know I was being a good boy? I was so excited I began walking down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace after the second step as it began to move off the wall and fade into the darkness in my living room. That's when I heard him. A very strong, masculine voice, different from the first. Not at all like my father's. Not to say he isn't masculine. It was just distinctly different. It said, "Stop, right now. Go back up those stairs." I listened, turned around, and what happened next is something I am not sure I would believe if someone else had told me the same story. After reaching the top of the stairs, I heard a very loud crash that sent me running back to my mother's bed, where I jumped straight under the covers and stayed there the whole night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights, little Christmas flower lights that glowed red, which my mother had put on the railing down the stairs, were pulled straight down to the bottom of the stairs, some broken from what seemed like a forceful tear, laying in a single pile. The dry sink in my living room had fallen from the wall. My mother could not explain it. My father was worried we had been the victims of a home invasion. My sister was crying. There was nothing missing. Nobody had broken in, and there seemed to be no reason for this to have happened. And then I saw it, and I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I could not force words out of my mouth. There, on the edge of the wooden dry sink which had been facing up, were 3 indentations where the finish on the wood had been worn away, almost as if in a forceful grip. Something down there had grabbed it and threw it. That was what the bang was. I was mortified. After that day, I never heard a single voice again. I do not like to imagine what was waiting downstairs for me that night, if it was anything at all. But I can tell you that the reality was that something had physically acted upon 2 things in my house near the bottom of that stairwell. After this, I never heard another whisper again. Which is sad, because in some ways, I would have liked to thank the man, or masculine energy, that had stopped me from going down those stairs. This happened when I was 7 or 7.5, as I liked to say at the time. I am now 20 years old, and because of this incident, I am still afraid of the dark, especially shadowy stairwells. I lived in an old 2-bedroom, 3-story walk-up for a time in my early 20s in Toronto. A few days after moving in, my roommate Mike chided me in the morning for banging on the wall that separated our bedrooms and pacing back and forth across the apartment at night. We agreed that he must have been dreaming, or it was sounds from other apartments, as I had done no such thing. We concluded that it must have been nothing and left it at that. But this became a regular nightly occurrence. Shortly thereafter, I started noticing, at certain times in my own bedroom, the cloying smell of cheap women's perfume mixed with a damp, musty smell. Imagine an old person's clothes left on a damp, musty basement floor near a litter box that wasn't being changed often enough, and you get the idea. What made it even weirder is that I would be filled with a sudden, horrible sense of foreboding a few moments before the smell would begin. Mike flaked out and left only 4 months into our 1-year lease, which meant I was left footing the rent for the entire place until I could find another roommate. I had decided to try and sleep in his bedroom shortly after he moved, to see if things would get better. The very first night I slept in his former room, I had an incredibly detailed and realistic nightmare of myself standing in the dimly lit bathroom of the apartment and cutting my own face with a large shard of glass while staring into the broken bathroom mirror. It was only broken in the dream. Soon after that, I started to hear loud bangs at night and the flushing of the toilet in the bathroom. Several times the hot water in the bathtub turned on full blast in the middle of the night. One of the freakier things that happened not too long before I moved was the time I was woken up by the TV blaring Poltergeist on City TV at about 2 in the morning. At that time, the channel would always play movies late at night, but the fact that the one time my analog TV, you turn a knob to change the channel or the volume, pull a knob to turn it on, turned on by itself at full blast was when a movie like Poltergeist was playing. My grandfather was a difficult man, an alcoholic and extremely violent. He once tried to kill my grandmother in front of their children. One of his less egregious acts was abandoning my grandmother with their 6 children, all under the age of 12. A few of his children maintained minimal contact with him. He lived about 30 or 40 miles from my grandmother and the 2 children who had stayed in the area. In his 80s, he was hospitalized and passed away in the middle of the night. The following morning, his oldest child, one of my aunts, went to the morgue to identify the body and complete the necessary paperwork. On her way, she stopped by my grandmother's to relay the news. Upon her arrival, my grandmother remarked, "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." My grandmother had started showing signs of dementia, or perhaps just the natural effects of aging, so her odd comments weren't too out of character. My aunt assumed that the hospital or one of her siblings had already informed their mother of the news. My aunt dismissed it and proceeded to the morgue. She was astonished to see the time of death listed as 12:10 a.m. on the death certificate. On her way home, she visited my grandmother again and inquired who had informed her of the news, asking why she thought he had died just past midnight. My grandmother replied, "He came to see me at 12:30 and we talked for a while. He wanted to apologize for all he had done to me and you kids. I think he made his peace and was able to move on, so I'm glad for that."